Ladies and gentlemen, it is essential to begin with a fundamental truth. Morality is not black and white, nor is human nature fixed in its essence. People are not born good or bad. Rather, they become so through choices, habits, and the values they uphold. Today, we'll explore 9 traits that often define those we label as bad, not as a condemnation of their being, but as a warning against behaviors that corrode the individual and society. Morality is a concept that sits at the very core of human existence. It governs how we interact, how we make decisions, and how we construct the frameworks of societies. But morality is rarely straightforward. It is not a rigid structure with clearly defined boundaries of good and bad. Instead, it is fluid, influenced by context, culture, personal experience, and choice. To understand bad behavior, one must first resist the temptation to simplify human nature into binaries. People are not inherently good or evil. They are complex beings shaped by a confluence of internal and external forces. And the more we understand this, the better able we in our lives will become, and the simpler our lives will become. The distinction between good and bad behavior lies in intent and consequence. While everyone is capable of making mistakes or acting in ways that harm others, it is the persistence in destructive patterns that solidifies the identity of what we term bad. Such behaviors are not random, but emerge from a certain psychological framework. Bad actions often arise from unchecked impulses, unaddressed wounds, or a deliberate rejection of ethical principles. At their core, these behaviors reveal a disconnection from accountability and empathy, the 2 pillars of morality that enable humans to coexist harmoniously. When we discuss morality, it is important to recognize that it is more than a set of rules. It is a discipline, something that must be cultivated. To act morally is to impose order on the chaos of human emotion, to temper desire with reason, and to balance personal ambition with the broader good. Without these practices, morality erodes, and individuals become susceptible to the traits we identify as harmful or destructive. Human tendencies are not innately virtuous. Left unchecked, they can devolve into selfishness, cruelty, and indifference. For example, a small lie told for convenience can evolve into a habitual pattern of deception that undermines trust. Similarly, the natural desire for achievement can spiral into an unrelenting hunger for power, causing one to exploit or harm others. And this moral decline is often insidious. It does not happen overnight, but through a series of small, seemingly inconsequential choices that lead individuals down a path of destruction. Religion declines the more that anger the great man. To label someone as bad is often reductive, as it focuses on the individual rather than their behaviors. This is not to excuse harmful actions, but to approach them with nuance. Bad actions often stem from fear, insecurity, or a lack of self-awareness, rather than an inherent desire to cause harm. This distinction is critical. If we view morality as fixed, we reduce the potential for growth and change, not just in others, but in ourselves. To acknowledge the fluid nature of morality is to recognize that just as people can fall into destructive patterns, they can also rise above them. And they rise above them because reason learns to trust that the great supply track, the behavior, is the source. The nature of morality is tied to the choices we make every day. It is in the small decisions, whether to lie or tell the truth, to act selfishly or generously, to confront or evade responsibility, that our character is shaped. Understanding this dynamic equips us not only to identify destructive behaviors in others, but also to guard against them in ourselves. The distinction between character and behavior is a crucial element in understanding human morality and the actions we deem good or bad. Character refers to the underlying qualities, values, and principles that define a person, while behavior is the outward expression of those internal traits. It is essential to recognize this difference because behavior can change depending on circumstances, emotions, or external pressures, even when character remains intact. Likewise, someone with questionable character may occasionally act in ways that appear good, often for ulterior motives or out of convenience. This distinction allows for a more nuanced view of human actions, avoiding the trap of labeling individuals as wholly good or bad based solely on isolated incidents. When examining harmful or destructive actions, it is important to approach them through the lens of behavior rather than ascribing those actions to an inherent moral failure within the individual. Human beings are not static, they are dynamic, capable of growth and regression. By focusing on behavior, we open the door to accountability and change. For example, a person who lies habitually may not be irredeemably deceitful as a core aspect of their character, but rather someone who has developed a pattern of dishonesty due to fear, insecurity, or lack of moral discipline. Addressing the root cause of their behavior creates the opportunity for transformation. And on the other hand, there are cases where patterns of behavior over time reflect deeper issues within a person's character. When harmful actions become consistent and intentional, when they stem from deeply ingrained values or beliefs that prioritize self-interest, power, or control over integrity and empathy, they reveal flaws in character rather than temporary lapses in judgment. This is why long-term observation is essential in assessing whether someone's actions are situational or reflective of their moral core. It is not a single lie, betrayal, or outburst that defines a person, but the persistence of such actions and their unwillingness to change. This distinction is also critical for self-reflection. People often make mistakes and engage in actions they later regret, but these moments do not necessarily mean they are bad. What matters is the ability to take responsibility for those actions, learn from them, and strive to act differently in the future. The willingness to confront one's own flaws and shortcomings is a sign of strong character, even in the face of behavioral missteps. Conversely, the refusal to acknowledge harm caused, the tendency to shift blame, or the lack of effort to improve suggests a deeper issue with character itself. Understanding the separation between character and behavior also allows us to approach others with empathy and fairness. It encourages us to see beyond surface-level actions and consider the broader context of a person's life, the pressures they face, and the motivations behind their choices. At the same time, it reminds us that character is revealed through repeated behavior. A person's actions over time are the truest reflection of their values and the moral principles they hold. Recognizing this balance equips us to navigate relationships, hold others accountable, and foster both personal and collective growth. Understanding the 9 defining traits of harmful or destructive behavior requires us to look deeply at recurring patterns that lead to personal and societal dysfunction. These traits do not emerge in isolation. They are interconnected and often reinforce one another, creating a cycle of harm that can be difficult to break. By identifying these traits, we can develop a clearer picture of what constitutes bad behavior and how it manifests in the real world. Deception is a foundational trait of destructive behavior. It involves not just lying to others, but also deceiving oneself. A person who consistently distorts the truth often does so to manipulate outcomes, evade responsibility, or maintain a facade. Over time, deception erodes trust, the cornerstone of all healthy relationships and societies. Without trust, relationships crumble, and collaboration becomes impossible, leading to isolation and division. The hunger for power is another defining trait. While ambition and the pursuit of influence are not inherently negative, the relentless drive to dominate others is often rooted in insecurity or a desire to compensate for perceived inadequacies. This type of power-seeking disregards the needs and rights of others, prioritizing control over cooperation. When unchecked, it leads to exploitation, coercion, and the breakdown of mutual respect. The lack of power-seeking leads to exploitation, coercion, and the breakdown of mutual respect. A lack of accountability is closely tied to the refusal to accept responsibility for one's actions. People who exhibit this trait consistently shift blame onto others or external circumstances, avoiding the difficult but necessary process of self-reflection. This unwillingness to confront one's own faults creates a cycle of denial and stagnation, preventing growth and perpetuating harm. End quote. Exploitation of others is a hallmark of bad behavior. It stems from viewing people not as individuals with intrinsic worth, but as tools to be used for personal gain. This can manifest in relationships, workplaces, or larger societal systems, where those in positions of power exploit vulnerabilities for profit, status, or control. Exploitation dehumanizes and creates profound inequality, breeding resentment and conflict. Contempt for vulnerability reveals itself in how people treat those who are weaker or less fortunate. Rather than showing compassion, individuals with this trait may ridicule, belittle, or exploit vulnerability, seeing it as an opportunity for domination. This behavior stems from a fear of their own weaknesses and an attempt to mask it through aggression. Chronic resentment and envy are internal states that often lead to destructive actions. Resentment festers when individuals feel wronged or unacknowledged, while envy arises from comparing oneself to others. Together, they drive people to sabotage relationships, undermine others' successes, and remain trapped in bitterness. It's emotional instability, particularly an inability to regulate emotions like anger or frustration, can result in impulsive and harmful actions. Emotional outbursts harm not only the person expressing them, but also those around them, creating cycles of conflict and instability. So, a disregard for truth is another key trait. When people consistently distort or dismiss facts, they undermine the foundations of trust and reality itself. This behavior is particularly dangerous because it destabilizes institutions and relationships, creating environments where dishonesty thrives. Narcissistic grandiosity involves an inflated sense of self-importance. People with this trait often demand admiration and privilege while devaluing the contributions and needs of others. This self-centeredness blinds them to the harm they cause and isolates them from meaningful connections. By recognizing these traits, we can better identify and address harmful behaviors, both in ourselves and others, fostering accountability and growth. The psychological roots of harmful traits run deep, often shaped by a combination of internal dispositions and external influences. Understanding these roots is essential if we are to address and mitigate the behaviors that can lead to harm. These traits do not arise out of nowhere. They are the result of complex psychological processes that intertwine with life experiences, environment, and personal choices. To understand destructive behaviors, we must explore the psychological mechanisms that underlie them. One of the most common origins of harmful behavior is unresolved trauma. When people experience deep emotional wounds, whether from neglect, abuse, betrayal, or loss, they often develop coping mechanisms to protect themselves. While some of these mechanisms can be healthy, others can evolve into destructive patterns. For example, someone who has been betrayed repeatedly may become hyper-vigilant, distrusting everyone and resorting to manipulation or control to feel secure. What begins as self-preservation can spiral into harmful actions that hurt others. Another psychological root is the presence of narcissistic tendencies, which often stem from insecurity. At their core, narcissistic individuals may feel deeply inadequate or unworthy, but they mask these feelings by projecting an inflated sense of self-importance. This compensatory behavior enables them to avoid confronting their vulnerabilities. However, it also leads to behaviors like exploitation, manipulation, and a lack of empathy. The need to maintain their facade of superiority prevents them from forming genuine connections with others. A lack of emotional regulation is another key factor. People who struggle to manage their emotions often find themselves acting impulsively, driven by anger, frustration, or fear. This inability to process and channel emotions constructively can lead to harmful behaviors like outbursts, aggression, or vindictiveness. Many times, this emotional instability stems from a lack of early guidance in managing emotions, or from growing up in environments where such behaviors were normalized. Learned behavior also plays a significant role. Many harmful traits are modeled in childhood or adolescence by caregivers, peers, or authority figures. If a person grows up in an environment where dishonesty, exploitation, or blame shifting is rewarded, or at least tolerated, they are likely to adopt these behaviors as survival strategies. Over time, these strategies become ingrained, shaping their approach to relationships and challenges. The role of social and cultural influences cannot be ignored. Societies that prioritize competition over cooperation, material success over integrity, or power over humility create fertile ground for harmful traits to flourish. People internalize the values of their environment, often adopting behaviors that align with what they perceive as necessary to succeed or gain acceptance. In such cases, destructive traits like deception, exploitation, and manipulation are not just personal failings, but reflections of broader systemic issues. Another critical factor is the lack of self-awareness. Many harmful behaviors persist because individuals are unable or unwilling to examine their own actions critically. This absence of introspection creates a feedback loop where destructive patterns are reinforced rather than questioned. Without self-awareness, people remain blind to the impact of their actions on others and on themselves. The psychological roots of harmful traits are complex and multifaceted. They often stem from pain, fear, or misguided attempts to navigate a difficult world. While this does not excuse harmful behavior, it provides a framework for understanding and addressing it. By identifying these psychological underpinnings, we can begin to foster compassion and accountability, creating opportunities for growth and healing for individuals and for society as a whole. The impact of harmful behaviors on society is far-reaching, often creating ripples that extend far beyond the individuals who exhibit them. When destructive traits such as deception, exploitation, or blame shifting become prevalent, they erode the foundational trust that holds relationships, communities, and institutions together. Societies are built on shared values, mutual respect, and cooperation. But these behaviors disrupt that balance, leading to disconnection, conflict, and fragmentation. At the interpersonal level, harmful behaviors damage relationships. For example, a pattern of deception or manipulation undermines trust between individuals. Trust is the cornerstone of all meaningful connections, whether in friendships, families, or romantic relationships. When it is broken, it creates an atmosphere of suspicion and doubt. This can lead to cycles of resentment, isolation, and retaliation, making it difficult for individuals to form healthy, supportive bonds. Over time, these broken connections contribute to a sense of loneliness and alienation, which affects not only the individuals involved, but also their broader social circles. In the fall of 1942, the many thousands of American soldiers captured in Hancock were accompanied to their final. In larger communities, the effects of destructive behaviors can be magnified. When exploitation or contempt for vulnerability becomes normalized, it creates systems of inequality and oppression. For example, when individuals in positions of power exploit others for personal gain, it perpetuates cycles of poverty, disenfranchisement, and disempowerment. This is often seen in workplaces, where unethical leaders prioritize profit or personal ambition over the well-being of employees, creating toxic environments that stifle creativity, collaboration, and morale. These dynamics can spread across industries and sectors, influencing societal norms and expectations. Harmful behaviors also have a significant impact on institutions and governance. When traits like a disregard for truth or a hunger for power infiltrate systems of leadership, the consequences are profound. Dishonesty and manipulation at the institutional level undermine public trust in critical structures such as government, education, and healthcare. When leaders prioritize personal agendas over the collective good, it creates corruption and inefficiency, eroding the confidence people have in these systems. This, in turn, breeds cynicism and disengagement among the population, weakening the very fabric of democracy and social cohesion. The societal impact of harmful behaviors is not limited to immediate, tangible consequences. Over time, these behaviors shape cultural values and norms. For instance, in a society where narcissism and self-interest are celebrated, individuals may feel pressured to adopt these traits to succeed or gain recognition. This creates a cycle where harmful behaviors are perpetuated and even rewarded, making it increasingly difficult to foster empathy, accountability, and cooperation. On a broader level, the collective effect of harmful traits contributes to a more fragmented and polarized world. When people prioritize personal gain over the greater good, it becomes challenging to address shared problems such as climate change, inequality, or global health crises. Divisions widen and collaboration diminishes, leaving society ill-equipped to confront the complex challenges of the modern era. Despite these challenges, understanding the societal impact of harmful behaviors offers an opportunity for change. By recognizing the destructive patterns that permeate relationships, communities, and institutions, individuals can take proactive steps to counteract them. Encouraging empathy, integrity, and accountability at all levels of society can help rebuild trust and create a culture that prioritizes the collective well-being. While the ripple effects of harmful behaviors are significant, so too are the possibilities for positive transformation when these traits are addressed and replaced with values that strengthen rather than weaken society. Strategies for recognizing and addressing harmful behaviors in ourselves and others are essential for fostering personal growth, healthy relationships, and a resilient society. Awareness is the first and most crucial step. Without the ability to identify destructive patterns, individuals and communities are left vulnerable to their consequences. Recognizing these behaviors requires a combination of self-reflection, observation, and education, as well as a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. The first strategy involves cultivating self-awareness. Many harmful behaviors are not intentional but arise from unconscious patterns or unexamined habits. Taking the time to reflect on one's actions, motivations, and emotional responses can help identify areas where improvement is needed. Tools like journaling, mindfulness practices, or seeking feedback from trusted individuals can facilitate this process. For example, if someone notices a tendency to blame others when things go wrong, they might explore the underlying reasons for this behavior, whether it stems from fear of failure, insecurity, or an inability to accept criticism. Another important strategy is learning to recognize harmful behaviors in others without immediately resorting to judgment. Observing patterns over time is key, as single actions may not always reflect a person's character. For instance, someone who occasionally lies under pressure might not be inherently deceitful, but someone who consistently manipulates facts for personal gain reveals a deeper issue. By focusing on patterns rather than isolated incidents, we can develop a more accurate understanding of others' behavior. Education plays a significant role in this process. Understanding the psychological roots of harmful traits, such as insecurity, unresolved trauma, or cultural influences, allows us to approach the issue with empathy and insight. This doesn't mean excusing bad behavior, but recognizing that it often stems from pain or maladaptive coping mechanisms. Education also helps in identifying the subtle ways harmful behaviors can manifest, such as passive aggressiveness, covert manipulation, or emotional neglect, which are often harder to detect than overtly destructive actions. Once awareness is established, setting boundaries becomes essential. When dealing with others who exhibit harmful traits, it's important to protect oneself from being drawn into their patterns. This might involve asserting limits, refusing to tolerate manipulative behavior, or distancing oneself from toxic environments. Setting boundaries not only preserves personal well-being, but also communicates that such behaviors are unacceptable, encouraging accountability. For personal growth, fostering positive traits is just as important as identifying harmful ones. Cultivating empathy, accountability, and emotional regulation can counteract tendencies like blame shifting, exploitation, or emotional outbursts. This requires consistent effort, such as practicing active listening, taking responsibility for mistakes, and seeking constructive ways to manage stress and anger. Over time, these practices strengthen character and reduce the likelihood of engaging in harmful behaviors. At a societal level, promoting awareness and accountability can create environments where destructive traits are less likely to thrive. Encouraging open dialogue, fostering inclusive communities, and holding leaders accountable for their actions are ways to build a culture that values integrity and compassion. Public education and mental health resources can also empower individuals to address their own tendencies and seek support when needed. The journey toward recognizing and addressing harmful behaviors requires patience and dedication. It is not about achieving perfection, but about striving for growth and creating conditions where empathy, honesty, and accountability can flourish. By implementing these strategies, individuals and communities can break the cycles of harm and contribute to a more constructive and compassionate world. In conclusion, understanding and addressing the traits and behaviors that define harmful individuals is not just an exercise in judgment, but an essential step toward personal growth and societal improvement. These traits, rooted in deception, exploitation, lack of accountability, and emotional instability, create ripples that harm relationships, communities, and institutions. However, they are not immutable. By examining the psychological roots of these behaviors, fostering self-awareness, and creating strategies to recognize and confront them, we can break the cycles of harm that perpetuate dysfunction and suffering. The distinction between character and behavior reminds us that no one is inherently beyond redemption. People are complex and capable of change, provided they are willing to confront their flaws and take responsibility for their actions. Similarly, by fostering environments of empathy, accountability, and shared values, we can mitigate the impact of destructive tendencies and promote positive transformation. This process begins with awareness of ourselves, others, and the societal structures that shape behavior. It demands courage to set boundaries, patience to cultivate positive traits, and resilience to challenge harmful patterns. Ultimately, the journey toward addressing these behaviors is not about perfection, but about progress. By committing to this effort, we pave the way for stronger relationships, healthier communities, and a more just and compassionate society.